Well, welcome back to another episode of Boomer Bust on the Boomer Bust channel. It has been a while. This has been a long awaited episode. Obviously stuff with COVID and other things. We have not been into the draft like I usually am, but this year I'm making an effort to jump back in. As I've mentioned before, I will be focusing around the top 5 to 7 people in each position. It's going to be a little more for some, a little less for others, depending on what type of draft we got. But today we are talking offensive tackles, and I'm going to do my best not to go on forever about this. But a couple things that I wanted to mention up top. Number one, this goes for offensive linemen, mainly tackles, but this goes for the draft in general. If you've been following me, you know that I evolve as an evaluator, and hopefully that anybody that does evaluate should be evolving. And so every year I kind of tweak something, I kind of see something a little different. This year I definitely have felt over the last few years what has opened my eyes up a little bit is the physical talent. So if I were to categorize things, and I've done this in a number of ways, but if I were to categorize things at a simple level, you're talking about IQ, you're talking about physical ability, what type of athlete this is, and you're talking about technique. Now, each position is going to require more or less of each of those. Obviously, there are certain positions where you got to have a higher IQ, then you got to have physical ability, and that's just how it goes. I would say for the longest time, and I've gotten gradually better at this, but still overall, I've always placed a premium on technique, and I still do to this day. But the idea of physical ability has grown a lot for me. And I think we'll see that show up. Now, that's not honestly anything philosophical. That's just kind of watching the practice. And it is definitely a result of the epidemic of the spread offense in college and how that's trickled into the NFL and how they had to adjust things. But also, even with that being said, I've seen many players where, again, I don't predict. I'm not here to predict what the round is. I'm not here to predict what this player is going to be. There's plenty of people that are going to say, this is a Pro Bowl player, this is an all-pro player, this is a starter, this is not a starter. I'm not here to do that. For the most part, I'm here to tell you just what the person is, and I will, if I have time, tell you where they could be best at. So I'm not here to predict. But as I've seen my evaluations over the last 3 years especially, one thing that I noticed across all positions, but, true to offensive tackles as well, is that these players are so far from a pro style that the curve is different. You know what I mean? So there was a time, you see it with like Alabama players. There was a time where the things being taught on the college level and the things being taught on the NFL level were very close. And so by the time you got to the NFL, we knew pretty much like the rare instances that what you were going to be, rare instances that you exceeded crazy beyond that. Some people didn't have opportunities. Some people didn't go to big colleges. And so you had some surprises. That was a time where you had a lot of HBCU grads do well. But now today, what they teach on the college level is so vastly different that what you're seeing on tape isn't nearly as indicative of what that player could be. And like I said, you got some programs like at Alabama or whatever where they do get you towards that peak, but most people don't. And so I think the NFL coaches have looked at it and said, hey, that physical talent, we can mold it. You know, that was the question before, the piece of clay. Who's the piece of clay and who's ready made? I think we have vast majority pieces of clays now. And so you got to adjust your grading accordingly. So anyway, that's just kind of a little bit of a primer. All right, so let's start off. And I don't got these 100% down, but I'm going to say Ikem Ekwonu. That might be wrong, but from North Carolina State. And I, as you might remember, might not, I find a certain site and I just go off that. I don't watch college football. This is the only time I really dig into college football. And honestly, I continue to hate college football more and more. But for the draft, this is where we can focus in. So North Carolina State, we got Ikem, and he played left tackle. Did a little bit of guard, but for me, really great prospect. I mean, I'll probably be doing more general takes than just really trying to dissect, and that's not my thing anyway. But the thing that stood out to me about him is probably the best blend. Of the 7 that I saw, that this is the best blend. Now, again, for some people, that might be the thing. Who has a good blend of versatility, floor and ceiling? Some people are more like who has the highest ceiling, and we're going to go for that. And they just got raw natural talent. But for me, Ikem, I think, displayed a lot of both. I mean, you got a guy that I said had some time at guard, but also time at tackle. And we'll see that through a number of people. But it has a build of a guard. I mean, 6'4", 320, just a very stout, more leverage built guy, and plays kind of with that guard attitude, which I enjoy as well. So for me, I think I would say he's a mauler, a bit of a road grader. I mean, the technique isn't as bad as a mauler. Usually a mauler is just overwhelming, doesn't have as much technique. I think he has a little more technique than that. Still going to have to learn some pass pro for the NFL style, but works to chase down blocks, works to keep his feet going, and things like that I appreciate. For me, though, I think he's a better run blocker than a pass blocker. And there's potential there in the pass blocking game, but overall, I like him in the run blocking game. Just really good angles. I mean, good feet, good ability to get to the second level, good in space. Not, a next level athlete or anything, but still someone that stood out on tape that he can get to a number of places that you need him to go to. I love his double team technique. Again, his leg drive, all these things that really you look for in a run blocker. And I think he's scheme versatile. He looked really good in zone. I think just understanding how to cut off players and understand angles, but he looked just as good as in power stuff as well. So I think he projects as a really good run blocker. I mean, I think he can hold his own at guard, but I think you'd be kind of wasting him there. He really does, to me, feel like he could be somebody that can play either tackle position. So there we go down to Evan Neal, which I found out is like a lot of people's number 1 overall pick. So from Alabama, and don't get me wrong, he's a giant dude. We get that. And there's a lot of natural ability. Every year you see people who stand for different players. There's some people saying that Evan Neal is like an all-pro and all that. I don't agree with that. I think he's much less the floor than he is the ceiling. And again, some people are going to gravitate towards that, and that's fine. For me personally, I don't see the floor. I think the ceiling is where it's at, with the length, with the size, with the mobility. I know people are happy about it, But for me, there's a lot of technique issues. The man whiffs too often, and he's not on blocks too often. I mean, you have the old adage that a player spending too much or offensive lineman spending too much time on the ground is a red flag. And I don't think it's like a not pick him red flag, but it's very obviously there. And I think some people are going to get wowed by the wild plays. They're going to get wowed by the size. But I'm not going to ignore the fact that, yeah, he whiffs some blocks and he doesn't stay on blocks too well too often. The other issue I have is his motor. If you look at how I grade players for offensive tackles, the gradable traits is pass blocking, run blocking, and motor. Motor is a big thing offensively and defensively. He gives up too early, way too early. And again, there's so much there to work with. And I think very early on, I might have got lost into this idea of they can't be something. Now, he very much reminds me of Makai Beckham, which I didn't say he couldn't be something, but when you have a lot of holes or whatever, then you start talking about scheme dependability. Is this a person that's plug and play, or is this a person that's going to need a good situation and some coaching? And that's how I felt about Becton. A lot of people try to attack me for that, but I think it was warranted. And I feel the same here. I personally wouldn't spend a number one pick, but I understand the upside and I see what people are looking at. I mean, there's some really great things in his arsenal. So the first tape I watched was Georgia. And that really sets the bar, whatever the first tape you watch. And to me, it was some red flags. And you look back and you say, okay, he played much better overall. But Georgia is a team that's going to be producing NFL players on defense. So you got to kind of weigh that. But again, I understand the upside that everybody's looking at. So a big mauler. And I definitely think somebody that can end up being effective. All right, so we go down to Charles Cross from Mississippi State. Mississippi State ran an air raid offense, hella passing. Even with that, I think Cross had a lot of reps at pass protection, but I still see him as a bit of a grappler, and not to say a mauler in the sense that he's hugging people, but a grappler as in a lot of hand fighting, a lot of leverage at the shoulders, and a little bit wide of the frame. I don't know if he was a wrestler, but that's what he reminds me of, where he really hand fights to kind of leverage what a person is. Now, when you talk about an air raid, when you talk about a pass protector, that comes at the expense of run blocking. I do think he's a better pass blocker than a run blocker, but I think there's some potential there in his run blocking. I think, honestly, if you look at it, he gets to the second level really well. And I think that he has really good angles and that he's going to get in the way. And sometimes that's a little bit of a dirty word or a phrase, but sometimes it's exactly what you need. And I think he could be very adequate in the run game than people might realize because they're focusing on his run or his pass protection, which I love. I mean, he's got long arms. He's got good extension. His feet are really good, and you just got to work on the consistency. And that's the thing for all linemen. I mean, for the love of God, I can't understand why these linemen stop their feet, but you got a guy where I believe if you get his hand placement right, I believe if you get his, his feet consistency right, he can pass protect with the best of them. And he's still fairly young at it. So it'll be interesting. I think he's definitely one that, you want to keep an eye on as a flyer. All right, so we moved down to Penning from northern Iowa, UNI. Big dude, honestly, not a huge fan. I see that he is very popular amongst a lot of people. I don't see it. I know he has the size. I know he has the length. I know he has the strength. I think most people recognize he doesn't have the same ability and agility as some other players. But the biggest thing for me is he can't bend. And so I don't love offensive linemen that really are stiff in the hips. And again, I go back to Makai Beckham a little bit, who was bigger than this guy. And maybe you could make the same argument, but I think he has some natural strength that allows him to do some things, even though I still contend he's not as top notch as people try to make him out to be. But Pennon, I don't think he has that same level of raw strength. Even though he's nasty, even though he gets after it, I don't see him with that. I think he's a very average athlete to below average athlete, and that's going to show up in the NFL. So I'm not a fan of stiff linemen, especially at the tackle position. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Okay, let's go to Nicholas Petit-Frere. I don't know how to pronounce that. I heard him say it, but then I don't remember. So I hope that's somewhat close. So from Ohio State, we got Nicholas, and I was really intrigued. I loved him very early on. I got 5 games at Ohio State. And as I went on, I was like, okay, I see some of the holes. But for the most part, I mean, you got a guy, again, with the length, with the size. Just what stood out to me is the ability as an athlete. Now, he was one of the most frustrating to watch because his feet were very inconsistent. And it's tough when you see a guy who can chase down the block, who can stay with a blocker, who can go down to the second level and really, wreak havoc on linebackers and safeties. It's hard to watch him not be consistent. And that's what I saw. Mostly it seemed like against some of that top competition, like Hutchinson. And it might be nerves, I'm not sure, but there's some times against the better pass rushers where his feet froze up. And again, you just see on tape that he's a guy that can really do that as far as being athletic, and so it's frustrating when he doesn't. And so that's something that I think about. But I think excellent in zone. I mean, understands angles, gets good lateral movement, would be excellent in a zone heavy team. But also I think he has real potential as a pass blocker. Again, part of it is the pass set, which is a lot of linemen. And, part of it is the hand placement and all that. But I think he could put it together and be really, really effective. I think he might be a bit of a steal depending on where he goes. Moving down, we got Daniel Follali. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that. We got some interesting names this year. But from Minnesota, I mean, look, to me, I see some of the criticism, and I can understand it. But this guy's Tristan Wirfs. I mean, don't get it twisted. He's Tristan Wirfs. He's a little bit Orlando Brown, but much more Tristan Wirfs. Now, he's 380, if that's right, or anything close, 400. He's got to get his weight under control. You're not going to be able to play at a high level in the NFL at that weight. I think 350 is the playing weight, just looking at his frame. And so if you can shave down 30 to 40 some pounds and rebuild it with some muscle, or just, shaving in general, you'll be in the right place, because this dude has feet. For as big as he has feet, absolute feet with elite size. Now, 6'8", maybe 6'9", is going to be natural leverage problems. There's not much you can do about that. He's going to have some issues with certain players. But overall, again, I'm encouraged by what I've seen in the league with Beckham, with Orlando Brown, with a Rob Havenstein. He reminds me a bit of him. I mean, there is a place in the league for tight ends, running backs to help you in pass protection. There's a place in the league for guys that might not pick you up and take you to the stands, but they can get in your way and they could drive you or they could make you run the hoop. And that's what Daniel does. I mean, at the end of the day, as a pass blocker, he doesn't have a lot of experience in the pro style set, but overall, you got to run around him. I mean, he's huge. And again, this is exactly what I was saying about Wirfs. And when you're talking about an NFL coach getting with his feet and getting to his pass set, he's going to be even more dangerous. So you got to go around him. I think explosive people, speed people, they're going to give him trouble still. But for the most part, not only does he do a good job on the edge, but he runs with blocks for a big guy. And so when he gets tangled up with you, it's over. You're not bull rushing him. And if you try to counter, this is one of the few linemen at this size and this type that if you counter, he can still work with you. I really think the only way to beat him is pure speed off the edge, maybe speed to power, but his anchor is good. And so I think he is much more of a prospect than some people might be giving him credit for. And then lastly, we got Bernard Raymond from Central Michigan, who to me is a bit of a classic tweener. Reminds me of Joe Thomas, to be honest. This is a guy that people might not remember, but Joe Thomas was not an amazing run blocker. Some people would say wasn't that great. But you get a guy that has high technique, a guy that has high motor, but at the same time, at the same time, he doesn't have the same strength that other people have. And so that's what you see with Raymond. I mean, I think really good technique. Hand placement is excellent. Dropping his anchor is pretty good. It's just he doesn't have the natural strength, core strength. And he's a converted tight end, so that might be it. I mean, I think there's still room for improvement. But some guys just naturally won't be strong. You think, oh, they're so tall and big, but they still won't be that as strong as some NFL players. And so I think that might be him. It might not. We'll see. I think Dolphins, for whatever reason, sounds good to me. Just on the right side and the tendencies of how pass rushers are, but that's also to his blind side. So, I mean, it might work out, but I like him. I think, I wouldn't say exactly a project, but definitely a high floor type player. And, there's a few people that like him in the first round. But we'll see where he goes. I think he just has the tools, the length. He has the build. He has the IQ. It's just the natural raw strength that people have questions with. So there we are. Overall, I would say Evan Neal's not my number one. I tend to shy away from potential. Not to say that I don't like potential, but if you give me a choice between a person with potential and a floor, I'm going to take them over somebody that's just sky high potential. And so that's kind of how I feel, especially with his motor. He turns it down too often. I didn't like that. So anyway, that's my thoughts on the offensive tackles so far for the 2020 draft. Go down in the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share it around. Get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and thank you for listening.